Hey everyone, I'm back with another patch notes rundown. Today I'm going to be going over the Heavenly Light update 9.3. This update goes live on March 22nd. I'll be posting this video after that, so all the changes should have gone into effect. As always, I will be outlining the changes in the Joust game mode and how I think it'll affect there, but I'll still be going over all of the items and god changes, so you'll probably get the information that you want no matter what mode you play. The first change going into effect is a more general one, but now each player is only going to be able to buy one glyph. So no matter how many of those glyph items you buy, you can only upgrade one in any game mode. The next change outlined is happening with Amulet of Silence. It's now only going to trigger the cooldown if it successfully applies to an enemy god. Before, you could kind of waste it on minions or camps by accident, so just a little bit more usefulness. I still think the other upgrade is better in Joust, so not a huge impact there, but just a little bit better overall. Thorns of Overgrowth, the next item, getting a little bit of a buff, increasing the radius of those bonus buffs from 40 units to 55 units. As you can see in the detailed text to the right, 25% of all damage you take for 5 seconds is going to be reflected. You get 50% reduction on lifesteal to enemies for total lifesteal, and then you get a stack of 5% attack speed and movement speed for every enemy within 40 units. That's moving to 55. It'll be easier for you to get that 15% extra attack and movement speed in Joust because there's only 3 enemies that can be near you. So it'll be a little bit better, but it's going to take some convincing for me to actually start recommending Thorns and Joust. I still don't think it's a great way to go. The other Thorns of Sapping Strength, increasing the 35% reflection duration from 2 seconds to 3 seconds. So also a little bit more useful, but I think as an item, this is too dependent on the other enemy team doing something to you, and I wouldn't really recommend going Thorns in Joust again. Bracer of Illumination, also getting a little round of buffs, decreasing the cooldown from 100 seconds to 90 seconds, increasing the range on the patrolling ward from 60 units to 80 units, and then the ward, the patrolling part of it, will also be 15% faster. Bracer of Brilliance, the other upgrade in this tree, is just superior in Joust. You get 20% increased power and 20% movement speed whenever you go through it. Bracer of Illumination is more dependent on if you have health or not. I really would not recommend going this route in Joust at all. If you're going Bracer, you're going Bracer of Brilliance. Berserker Shield also getting a whole host of changes. So it's moving from 2,600 gold to 2,400 gold, 10 less physical power, 60 physical protection, which is 15 more than it was before. You still get the attack speed. You're losing the percent penetration, but you are also gaining 15 HP 5. And now in the passive, you're getting a 7% damage mitigation instead of all of those offensive boosts. So really they're trying to shift this item into more of a defensive type role. It does say it can be built by physical gods. That's not the case. They changed that in the PTS. So it's still only available to be built on assassins and warriors. A little bit cheaper. I think the offensive utility of this item has been taken away quite a bit, but you still might want to build it on some of those AA attack warriors just to have a little bit more mitigation and health. Aussie, no real change, but just an update to the text to make it more clear how it works. So Berserkers, once you drop below that 40% threshold, you automatically get that like Berserker proc. Aussie doesn't work the same way. It will only take effect when you take or deal a hit when you drop below that 35% health threshold. So you do have to actually deal or take damage before that 30% physical lifesteal for 5 seconds goes into effect. Blackthorn Hammer getting a tiny little buff, increasing the physical power from 25 to 30. You can see the stats on the right that it's going up from 25. It does have a lot of good stats on it. It has 400 health. It has that variable 10% cooldown reduction or MP5. This is to me a pretty underrated item, and with some of the other nerfs happening in the hammer tree, I think this is going to be a little bit more popular in 9.3. Spiked Shield, the tier 2 version into Void Shield, is decreasing in cost from 1,600 to 1,400. They are adding 50 health to it. It does have an aura on it as well, but there's not that many times in Joust that you're backing after you upgrade to a tier 1 and before you upgrade to a tier 3, so it's really not going to matter in the Joust game mode. Gladiator Shield also getting a little bit more health, going from 200 to 250. This is an item that can work pretty decently on some of the warriors that have a lot of abilities, so Cucullin or Sun Wukong, things like that, but it does scale with protection, so you can't really build it on hybrids as well. That being said, I think Bluestone being a little bit better, I think Blackthorn being a little bit better, it might make Glad Shield a more popular pick. Leather Cowl getting a little bit more power, increasing from 15 to 20. I think this actually is one of the more overlooked items right now. It has lifesteal on it, it has MP5, you get a little bit of attack speed, but that early power spike with 20 physical power is going to make some of those more ability-based hunters hit harder early, which is definitely always helpful. Not to mention you do get a little bit of movement speed if you happen to be caught out by yourself, and that may be the difference between you living and dying. Leader's Cowl, one of the upgrades from Leather's Cowl, also increasing in power from 40 to 50. As you can see here, you also provide 5% increased power to all nearby allied gods. It also stacks up to 3% for nearby allies, so that only gives you, 6% extra in Joust. I think it really comes down to, does your team more need power? If so, Leader's Cowl is a decent upgrade. If you want more power for yourself, if you want to do more damage yourself, you upgrade to Hunter's Cowl instead. Kin Sais also getting a cost decrease from 2,700 to 2,600. In my opinion, one of the best items in Joust right now because of the tankish meta that everybody seems to be running. You're doing maximum health, percent damage. Kin Sais, must buy item, it's cheaper now. You should have this on your team every single game. Jotunn's Ferocity also having a internal cooldown decrease from 60 to 30 seconds. So this passive states that you get a stack every time you hit or get hit by an enemy. You get 2% increased damage towards that enemy, and that stacks up to 10 times, so up to 20%. Before, that effect could only happen every 60 seconds. Now it's happening every 30. However, I don't think that this is a very good item in Joust. You're not going to be necessarily singling out targets very often, and realistically, Jotunn's Vigor, the other upgrade in this tree, gives you lifesteal more consistently. I just think that's the superior upgrade in this scenario. Katana, which is the tier 1 of the sword tree, decreasing in cost from 650 to 600. This item gives 10 physical power, 3% movement speed, so if you're looking for that early, it's going to be a little bit cheaper. Moving right along into Thousandfold Blade, which is the tier 2 upgrade from Katana, decreasing in cost from 1300 to 1250. That item gives 20 physical power and 5% movement speed, so again, just a little bit cheaper in that early tree. Getting into some of the tier 3 adjustments, Stone Cutting Sword also having a cost decrease from 2250 to 2200. I think this is another one of those items that goes a little bit under the radar in my opinion. You get a lot of physical power, you get movement speed, and if you have the ability as an assassin or warrior to just really stick to people and hit them with auto attacks, your melee basics are just really turning that kind of 1v1 in your favor and also help decrease protections so that your team can follow up. So don't discount this item, it's a little bit cheaper now. Think of it on people like Gilgamesh or Osiris, it can really make a big difference. Hastened Katana, another tier 3 in that sword tree that is having a cost decrease going from 2500 to 2450. I think this is still a little bit expensive for Joust for what you're looking for 25 power, and realistically if you're trying to stick to enemies and hit them with your basics more consistently, to me, I think Frostbound achieves that while also slowing the enemy team and setting up for your own team. So I don't think Hastened Katana has as much of a place in Joust. Jade Emperor's Crown also having more health by 50 and increasing the power debuff from 10% to 15%. Another item that I think goes under the radar, and I really don't think it's going to go under the radar anymore after this change. Having that debuff move from 10 to 15% is pretty significant, and it's going to help mages survive a little bit more often. I also think that diving Guardians can use this somewhat effectively depending on who it's on, so I do think that this is going to become a lot more popular in 9.3. Oni Hunter's Garb also having an increase in health, it's doubling from 100 to 200. Pretty significant. This item is, again, another one of them that kind of goes under the radar, but to me it does a lot. 20% crowd control reduction is really good. 60 magical prots, really good. MP5, always good. And then the mitigation, you have 3 stacks pretty much at all times in Joust. Voidstone also having a decreased magical protection reduction, going from 15% to 10%. So those enemy gods within 55 units are going to have their magical prots reduced by 10% now. I don't know if there's really any other item that you can fully replace this item with, so I don't think it's going to drop out of the meta by any means, but it's just not going to be quite as good. Runeforged Hammer getting a nerf, decreasing that physical power from 45 to 35. Pretty significant. This was basically a go-to first item build for a lot of people in this past meta because it has everything, and it still does have a lot of stats attached to it, but it's not going to be that must 100% build first item anymore. You're going to have to think about which of the hammers, because I think all the hammers are very viable. Maybe aside from Frostbound, you don't want to build that first, but aside from that, I think all hammers do their own thing and can have their own uses and usefulness. Hide of the Nemean Lion also having a decrease in physical protections from 90 to 70. The problem with this item in Joust is that you have to build an additional 100 protections to really get those block stacks. 90 physical protections is a lot, but to get the max use out of it and get those block stacks, you have to go almost fully into defense, and as a tank main in Joust, you really do have to go hybrid a lot of the time. So I didn't see this item built that much in the past, and this physical protection reduction is probably not going to help that. You're probably not going to see this item or want to build this item in place of something like Sovereignty or Mystical Mail or something like that. That's all the item changes. Let's get into the god changes. The first one, which is a pretty big one, Hebo having the self-root on his water spout ability removed. So that's like the long range pop-up ability that he has. Now he can move while firing it. A little bit more safety for him. He also has a magical power decrease on that ability because in PTS it just seemed a little bit too strong. In Joust, I just think Hebo has trouble because he's not that mobile. He can get singled out pretty often. He does have the ability to just 100 to 0 people, but I don't think this is going to shoot him up super far in the rankings in Joust. Poseidon, the second god, seeing some changes, a little bit of buffs I would call them. Mana cost reduction at every level on his Trident, and then a mana cost reduction at levels 2 through 5 on his Kraken. So he will be able to spam those abilities a little bit more often without having to worry about running out of mana, but he still has kind of the same issues of being fairly immobile and kind of easily jumped on, so this isn't going to really change Poseidon's viability in Joust at all. Baron Samedi also having some buffs, decreasing the self-slow on his ultimate from 60 to 40%, so he will be moving a little bit faster in that ult, increasing the tick damage scaling from 6% of magical power to 8% magical power, and that is a pretty decent buff. So at a damage per tick level, now every single tick that you hit is going to do 2% more of your magical power. Pretty significant. He will be better in Joust for sure. Some of the biggest changes this patch happening to Serqet. So they are shifting, they're calling it a rebalance on her abilities. So as you can see, her passive Catalyst, instead of doing percent max HP damage, you're going to have a percent max HP plus percent of your physical power. So it's going to scale up more based on the power that you build. That's going to reward more of an aggressive build and an offensive build and play style versus more of that support build that you kind of saw a lot of Serqet going in the past. Deathbane, decreasing that base damage per hit, but again, increasing the physical power scaling to encourage people to build more into those offensive builds. Cobra's Kiss, kind of a similar interaction, decreasing the initial base damage, but increasing that physical power, scaling to account for kind of late game and offensive building. Ambush, decreasing that leap range a little bit to make her a little bit less safe and more easy to punish when she finds herself out of position. Decreasing base damage, increasing physical power scaling, and then Last Breath, her ultimate, decreasing the base damage on that as well, but increasing the physical power scaling pretty significantly by 40% so that she's rewarded for those offensive builds. Because they are encouraging more of that offensive build and play style, she also now has a 35% damage mitigation on her Last Breath, her ultimate, because she is isolated in one place for a pretty significant amount of time. It's going to make it a little bit harder for enemies to just burst her down when she does go that full damage build. Pretty interesting. I don't know if this is kind of the first time that they've really shifted stats as significantly on one god, so I'm interested to see how it goes. Serqet wasn't super popular in Joust, and I think this will probably make her less popular in Joust, but I do think that she fills somewhat of a bruiser role decently well. Thor getting a couple of small buffs on his ultimate, Anvil of Dawn, increasing the lightning damage after he lands, and then also increasing the range on those lightning arcs from 30 units to 35. Lesser known part of his kit, but for 6 seconds after landing in his ult, if he does any damage with Mjolnir, he does have extra lightning arcing across to do that damage. Not really a significant buff for Thor in Joust. His ult can't really be used as effectively because the map is smaller, so this won't mean you're picking Thor really that much more than you already have been. Cupid also getting a buff on his heart bomb, increasing that physical power scaling from 75% to 80%. So not only does he get that little 5% boost on the initial hit of heart bomb, but if he has his passive stacked and it explodes, that's another 5%. So overall, he does get a 10% increase in damage, and heart bomb can hit hard. But I still think Cupid is just a very niche character. He can work decently well into people who have those movement abilities, and if you need to cripple them in his ult field, but realistically, he's not a super high tier hunter. Jing Wei also having increased damage per shot, so that buff her explosive bolts where she gets 3 extra shots that have a wider radius, increasing that from 110% to 120% of Jing Wei's physical power, so that'll hit a little bit harder. I still think in Joust she's not super useful. She is very safe, just like in any other game mode, but you kind of want more of that burst damage from a hunter or poke damage, and she doesn't really bring too much of that. Xbalanque also getting a little round of buffs, decreasing the cooldown level 1 through 4 on his poison darts, so a little bit more often you'll be able to apply that slow to apply that damage, but Xbalanque, not a super high tier hunter pick. He can work because of his CC immunity into certain comps to get away from those big CC ults, but realistically, not a priority pick by any means. Ymir getting a decreased cooldown on his Frost Breath. Instead of 16 seconds, now it's going to scale from 16 seconds down to 14 seconds at level 5. I think Ymir is one of those gods that you can really level up any single one of his abilities depending on what you're looking to do, and this just makes those situations where you're trying to level up Frost Breath feel a little bit better. Xing Chen also getting a couple buffs. I'm super pumped about this one. Sky Cutting Axe increasing protection buff from 10 scaling to 30 to 20 scaling to 40, so he's getting double that protection buff at level 1, which is pretty big. Also, he's getting a elongated duration from 3 to 4 seconds on that protection, so he's going to be a lot more tanky early, which I think is going to make him really good and really oppressive in Joust. So I think Xing Chen will definitely be somebody that I am playing a lot more often in 9.3. Cthulhu also getting a little bit of increased base damage on Sanity Break, his first ability, going from 90 scaling to 270 to 100 scaling to 300. So obviously a little bit more significant scaling at the end, level 5 there when you level that up. But more damage on Cthulhu is never a bad thing. He really is dependent on if you need to dive somebody super hard, because that's what he's good at. But this buff will definitely make him feel a little bit better when you're trying to hit that close range damage. Cucullin getting a couple buffs here too, increasing the health shield from 10 plus 10 per level to 10 plus 15 per level on that Berserk. So his passive, when he does go Berserk, he gets that little health shield. 5 more per level isn't too bad really, and that mixed with the decreased cooldown on Salmon's Leap from 16 to 15 seconds, he'll have both of his movement kind of abilities up more often. I do think Cucullin will shift up a little bit in prioritization for Joust picks. That mixed with like the Gladiator shield kind of shift, mixed with the Bluestone being pretty good, mixed with some other things and other items being a little bit more meta, I think Cucullin will be very good in 9.3. Shiva getting a couple nerfs. This god has been really, really good, really oppressive, so probably a good thing that he has a few of these things happening to him in 9.3. Decreasing the knock-up and pull height from 3.75 to 2.5 units. Pretty significant there. Decreasing the damage on the tick damage on his ring, and that power scaling a little bit less, 5% less. and then also decreasing the knockup height strength from 300 to 225. So both of the knockups on his abilities are going to be like 2/3 as effective. So we'll see if that's enough to really kind of put him in a more balanced place. I still think he's probably going to hit some more nerfs ahead, but for now, this is a good start. He'll still be good in Joust, probably a ban, probably a first pick or ban kind of scenario. Fenrir getting a little bit of a buff on his Brutalize, really one of the best abilities in the game in my opinion, having protections increased on that. He did have a few changes in 9.2 to make him less of like a support style pick, but having this buff on his Brutalize is going to make him pretty oppressive in Joust still, and you can build him Bruiser and still be effective, so still a very high Joust priority pick. So there you have it, all the changes is 9.3. Let me know what build you're going to be trying out. Let me know what god you're going to be playing more. If you learned something, if you were entertained, please make sure you subscribe, like, follow, comment. All that good stuff helps me know that you appreciate the content. Thank you guys so much for watching.